Have you ever been on a vacation that changed your life? Not just the places you saw, but the way you experienced them. Today's guest started with nothing but a passion for his hometown of Rome and a belief that travel should be intimate, authentic, and transformative. In 2009, as the global economy crumbled and the travel industry faced unprecedented challenges, he took the ultimate entrepreneurial leap of faith. 13 years later, when COVID-19 shut down global travel overnight, his business was facing extinction. But instead of giving up, he found a way to not just survive, but to thrive. From creative performer to founder of one of Europe's most respected tour companies, this is the raw, unfiltered journey of an entrepreneur who built his dream by helping others experience the world in a whole new way. Let's get into my conversation with Angelo Carotenuto. Welcome to the Jamilia Grier Show, where we reveal the raw, unfiltered journeys behind entrepreneurial success stories to empower you to take action in your own life. Today, I'm joined by Angelo Carotenuto, founder of Liv Tours, and what started as a one-man operation, sharing his beloved Rome with small groups of travelers, has grown into a premium tour company that's operating across Europe, known for creating intimate, unforgettable experiences. Angelo, thank you for joining me today, and I'm so excited to unpack your journey from basically a performer in Rome to now really operating one of the largest tour companies in Europe.
Jamilia, thank you so much. I'm humbled and honored to be here.
Great. So before we dive into Liv Tours, I want to start with, kind of the story of young Angelo and what that was like growing up in Rome, surrounded by thousands of years of history that, really people from the US, they can only dream about. What was it like to sort of introduce that history? And at what point did you realize that that's what you wanted to do?
That's a loaded question. So I'm born and raised in Rome. The appearance is that I have no accent. Accent may come out every once in a while when I get particularly passionate about a subject, but that is because my mother's from California. And my parents met in Rome as musicians. My mother and her family moved in the 70s to Rome as my grandfather won a sabbatical year to teach at the Music Conservatory of Rome. So I come from a family of musicians and performers, and that should be probably the real premise, meaning I was always exposed to the art, to creativity, to historical figures, history, movements, artistic creativity throughout history. So I may have had a leg up in that sense. But growing up in Rome, I have to be completely honest with you. A lot of Romans and a lot of Italians do forget the incredible fortune, luck they have, and don't really completely take advantage of it. So by saying that I was a leg up, I have to say that my parents, as my sister and I were growing up, always made it a point to expose to everything that Italy had to offer. There is a funny story that I think actually kind of an anecdote that encompasses what I'm trying to say is my parents, now this is the 80s, so there's no, the digital world is not part of our daily routine yet, but we used to create calendars for our family of pictures of my sister and I, thematic pictures. So every year, 87, 88, 89, 90, and whatever else, it was a different theme. And my parents would take pictures of us and glue it onto these cardboards that they had printed with the calendar and then mail it to our family in the US as a Christmas gift. And it must have been 89, 90. I was probably 7 or 8 years old, that the theme was Italian art. And so my sister and I had to enact gorgeous, beautiful, famous, world famous paintings or statues that you would have read about and my American family would have read about or have seen in history books or history books at school, but we were literally live reenacting them. So there I was the bean eater on the Caravaggio painting, or I was the David. Nowadays, this wouldn't work, right? You would not set pictures of a half-naked 8-year-old boy. But that was the 80s. It was a different era. So by doing that, we were not only getting into the art, like as performers, they were making it a point to actually take us to see these and really kind of looking at it with some sort of analytical eye, if you say, as much as an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old can do that. But that was sort of like really an extraordinary exposure to art that probably others wouldn't have gotten.
So I think what's interesting about your background, Angelo, is that you grew up with the arts and you grew up with history and culture. And most entrepreneurs today, everyone is so focused on tech, right? Everyone is focused on, I've got to get the MVP in place. I've got to build this out. I need to hire developers. But you started with this passion for culture and you started with the passion for history and arts. And I think that's really, a point to make and to just pause on, because it seems like along that journey, at some point when you looked at travel and the industry of tour guides, you realize there has to be a better way to do this. Do you remember that moment where you said there has to be a better way to do this?
Yeah, in order to get there, and that would have been somewhere in my professional career, and we'll get to it. I just want to, I guess, talk about two very tiny milestones that may have contributed to that realization. One would be the very first time I organized travel for people, and believe it or not, Jamilia, I was 17, and it was because now I was one of maybe a handful of people that played baseball in Rome, Italy. Can you imagine playing baseball in Italy when soccer is the major sport? Nobody's ever heard of baseball. But I had gotten in touch with a summer baseball tournament in Napa Valley at the Veterans Center. And I emailed them and said, would you ever be interested in having an Italian team as a guest appearance and part of the tournament? We're definitely can't compete, but I would love to organize this trip for my fellow team members. And most of them don't even have a passport. They've never been to the States, but they're so in love and in awe with American culture and baseball because they love the sport that it would change their life. And they responded, and they were super nice. And they responded immediately and said, absolutely, we'd be honored to have you as part of the tournament. So that's when, I have to confess, with the help of my mother, we organized a trip for 17 teenagers to go to the US. In California, there was the support of my grandparents, but we bought flights, rented vans, organized trips to Six Flags, 2 baseball games, Giants and Oakland's, lodging, food, and of course participating to the tournament, which we lost every game, so that's a given. But that was a life-changing experience for these people, and to this day, now mind you, I'm 42, so 25 years later, we still talk about it because we're still amazing friends. We've bonded at levels that otherwise would have never existed, and we still have anecdotes or funny stories from that trip and memories that we recall every once in a while, or we refer to as a joke. Then I ended up spending the summer there. That's a whole other story. They went back. I spent the summer there because I was trying to save money to go to college. So my higher education is actually in Los Angeles, and it was in acting. And the reason why it was in acting is because besides the fact that my family obviously would have encouraged a career of some sort, I feel particularly connected egotistically in attempting to alter people's emotions and inducing hormonal reactions that then explode into emotions. And so I loved acting for that reason. I loved being on stage and gifting that sort of transformative experience to the people that were watching. And it's in the middle of my college experience as I was going back to Rome that I got into tour guiding. That's a whole other story, probably a different podcast. But that's how I got introduced really properly, professionally to the travel world. And I very much loved what I was doing. Went back to Los Angeles, finished graduating, was supposed to go to London, but then ended up in Rome with this great job that I enjoyed doing. And I signed myself up to what I call the best gym of tour guiding. I exposed myself to anything that there was to do in that world at that time. So it could have been free tours, it could have been skip the lines, VAPs, cruises. I literally took American teenagers on buses to go see 12 capitals in 8 days in Europe. I mean, I literally did it all. And the realization, so to get to your point, the realization happened in 2009. And I probably wasn't the only one having this sort of epiphany or realization, but this is the embryonal era of the activity industry, where companies were starting and startups were being formed and the digital world was exploding, where we understood, this is true to this day in 2025, that tour guides back then, now we call it the activity industry or the activity compartment, but tour guides are to this day, and they were certainly at that time, the fastest growing compartment of the entire travel world. People, we are still growing faster than hotels, cruise ships, restaurants, transportation services. And latest data says that people are spending up to 65, 67% of their travel budget on experiences, on tour guides. So the realization that I made, and because of my background and what I had just shared with you, is that people have these extraordinary expectations when they're dreaming and planning their trip. And I bet you any money they're going through all sorts of emotions by finding something online on social media or be inspired or talking about it with their spouse or their children. They're sparking that emotion, that they're inducing themselves into that hormone that then explodes into the emotion, as I was saying earlier. And I realized that my duty, my mission, my North Star was to not just be a mean to get them somewhere or to visit a place or give them information, but perhaps realize, reenact, super exceed that expected emotional impact that they were hoping to relive when they were planning their trip. And this is something that, as you said, Jamilia, a lot of, in my view, my very humble view, a lot of companies, but also a lot of tour guides, a lot of people in the hospitality service in general, we forget that there's emotions involved. And we just sit and do things by the script. But we're supposed to be serving at the highest of levels and at the highest of expectations. David Ugara says it perfectly in Outrageous Hospitality. He talks about giving the people the space to be creative so that they can step out of line and connect, because there's no one-on-one. Nobody's always the same. And so I created a company that at that time was called Live Italy, that would transform every stereotype, every dream, every emotion that people were having about Italy into a service. Mind you, Italy is a easy playground. People know and want to experience in Italy: food, wine, culture, art, history, sports cars, soccer, Dolomite hiking, volcanoes. And so I created services that would deliver that emotion by experiencing that, by living that experience that they were so looking forward to live.
So you raised a lot there, but one sort of common theme of what you said that really resonates with me is this idea of the emotion behind it, right? So, you were focused on, so you had this great experience where you were able to bring people from Italy, your colleagues and everything, to participate in the tournament. And that triggered an emotion in you. I think you also felt fulfilled by being able to do that. You received some sort of emotional payback in witnessing their joy in that. But what's interesting, and what you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned this, but then when you went on to study acting, you were focused on creating emotion. In that, you were focused as an actor on creating emotion in other people. And this is why people's stories are just so interesting to me. So like you're traveling and you're actually engaging in the act of travel. You're studying emotion, how to bring about emotion and how to create certain reactions in people. And you're doing that as well. And it seems sort of like a natural evolution that when you get to this space where you are in the tour industry and the tour guide industry, that you're like, no, we're going to focus on emotion. We're going to focus on experiences. We want to create those experiences that bring about emotion. So I worked at Marriott International for a number of years in Asia Pacific. And I recall like the moment when they launched Bonvoy, right? Marriott Bonvoy. And, there's this big hurrah about coming up with the name. What does the name mean? When I heard the name, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Bonvoy, like, you gotta be kidding. That was my first reaction at the name. But the push behind the marketing was like, we don't want to just do travel. We want to do experiences. That's what their push was. We want more. We don't want people to just think about hotels. We want people to think about experiences. And it's so difficult. Like what I tell people is so difficult for large multinational corporations to connect with individuals. Because how can 20,000 people connect with one person. Right. And so what I think it's interesting about what you're doing is like you really honed in to this idea of we need to bring that emotion into the experience. We need people when they're done with this to come back and to be talking about it and talking about it. So I think that's interesting. And then also you mentioned creativity. And this is what I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't have time to tap into, is that if you're going to create, it starts from within. So many people listen to gurus and, oh, do this and sell here and say this and say that. But how often do they stop and think about internally, like who they are and how to get that expression out? And I think there's a lot of fear in that. So fear is like something that every entrepreneur faces. Did you ever have a point where you felt like a little hesitant, maybe not fear, because I think you're coming from like a very artistic background. So maybe that traditional fear wasn't there. Maybe it was. Did you ever feel hesitant to let that expression out as an entrepreneur?